why we're here, so to speak. How great New York is. Thank you on that, from an expert on that. Okay,
Just as
settle
Andrew
down.
comes in.
Okay, settle down. Settle down. Okay, good.
Hi.
Julie, hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. Okay, now, so we've got a really good group of New Yorkers up here to talk about a really great city that we live in. And I was just sort of sitting over there getting ready, and I just wrote down a few things that are why I live in New York, and why it's such a great place for so many things in this industry. Tech we're not only talking about the tech industry today, we're talking about tech as a force, but culture, diversity, subways, big companies, capital, media. I mean, there's some amazing things that New York uniquely has that the people in this room all understand, because that's why most of you live here. And we're going to talk about that. I mean, I think to some extent, I want this panel to be an advocacy panel for how much better tech would be if more of it was in New York, because I actually do think that the crisis that's been discussed on the stage today, that Jillian quite eloquently and passionately was predicting is going to really bite them in the ass in the near future, she said it better than that, it could be somewhat avoided if they were here, because they would more understand the world. So anyway, the people up here understand that kind of thing. Karen Klein is one of New York's great venture capitalists. She runs Bloomberg Beta, which is it's basically Mike Bloomberg's VC firm in a way, isn't it?
So we're backed by Bloomberg LP.
But he runs that, so it's pretty close to the same thing.
He's very close to us.
Very close to that.
And a good inspiration, since he's such a fabulous, founder.
He's one of the great New Yorkers, too. And also, you are embedded in what is almost certainly New York's largest native tech company, Bloomberg.
Exactly.
I mean, Google has more employees. Maybe they don't even. I don't know. Google has a lot of employees here, but you were founded here, and you are a tech company, so good for you. Jake Schwartz is a New York-based entrepreneur from General Assembly who has a very global perspective but is very deeply rooted in New York. General Assembly was founded here. It's one of the most successful startups here. It now has operations in many cities, which gives him a perspective to talk about the landscape of tech. He's quite eloquent about how they think out there versus here, as is our third panelist, Julie Samuels, who lived in San Francisco running a nonprofit there, focused on entrepreneurship, until coming here about 2 years ago to be the founding director of Tech NYC, which Fred Wilson, who was on the stage earlier, was one of the real leaders in creating, along with Tim Armstrong of AOL. So maybe we should just start with you, Julie, to talk about what Tech NYC is, and how you think about the potential of New York as a tech center and tech's role here.
So Tech NYC we're a nonprofit, member-supported organization. We have nearly 500 members made up of tech companies and investors here in the city. And it runs the gamut from Bloomberg, Google, Facebook, AOL, Techonomy, to all the tiny startups as well. So that part is really important, that we kind of get a snapshot of what's happening across tech companies and the investment community here in New York. We engage in kind of policy stuff, mostly state and local level. We work with the city. And when I think about it, it's a two-sided equation, as I guess most equations are, which is to say we work in New York to make sure that New York supports our companies, our members, our industry, the growth of not just the companies themselves, but also the development of technology here. But we also work with our members to support New York. And this leads into the second question. So we're just entering our second year as an organization. And across our membership, there's probably one thing that every member has in common. Frankly, I wish there were more. There probably are a lot that a lot of people share in common. But the one thing that is true across our entire membership is that everyone loves New York. Like, you don't end up here accidentally. Well, I mean, Jay can talk about this, I'm sure, but you don't, as an entrepreneur, say, oh, I'll just build a company in New York because it's the cheapest and most convenient. Like, that's just not how it works. So what you do see is people who want to be here because of the unique and amazing things that New York has to offer. Diversity, the subway, that's huge. The infrastructure we have is something that really attracts people here. And when I talk about diversity, I mean of people who live here, international, national, kind of across all types of things. I also mean diversity of industry, of experience, of expertise. And so when we think about the reasons we think there are so many reasons I'm bullish on New York. I'll just pick a couple to kind of highlight and can dig in on these or others if people want to talk about that. But we're incredibly bullish on the fact that you do have industries who've been here for a long time. You have expertise, you have capital, mentorship, and what you see then, because of that diversity of industry, is people can work for a startup in one of those verticals and then go to a big company and learn different skill sets and move around like that, which we think creates a more complete set of companies and of people building things. And nowhere, a couple other international cities have some of that flavor. London has a little bit of that, but not the same way New York does. The arts, the cultural institutions here.
It was the first word on my list. Culture.
The cultural institutions, the tradition of arts here, that is the kind of just creative class that underlies everything in this city is so crucial. I don't think we talk enough about how technology in so many ways is a creative endeavor itself, which I'm very interested in and also very bullish on. And when you think about that, and that can be, I shouldn't say simple, that can be something like UX, UI design, but it could also be really thinking about how, design thinking, how you build and create solutions to problems. Like New York knows how to do that. Finally, I'll say one last thing, and then I'll let you move on. But when you think about kind of the types, the phases in technology, company-wise, when you think about, we created the infrastructure for the internet. We created the tools that made the internet and technology more accessible to everyday people. The next kind of round, Steve Case talks about this a lot. His book is The Third Wave. When you talk about the next wave of companies, I think you're really going to see those in spaces like real estate, education, healthcare, insurance, these kind of tougher industries to break into. And I think New York is absolutely a much better place to navigate those issues than some other cities that shall remain nameless. Because here we know how to work with existing industry. We know how to work with policymakers and regulators. That's kind of built into New York. So I feel like New York is the place to be.
There you go.
If you think of what Fred Wilson said this morning about token-based systems being the opportunity to break the stranglehold of the internet giants that exist today, it's very interesting because that's actually, in a way, a finance-based business.
Yeah.
If that's really the future, we may be well positioned. Do you agree? And we'll have ladies first. And then.
Sure. I mean, in terms of New York being the best place to start a company, I wholeheartedly enjoy, and I made a career decision when I was at SoftBank to move to New York to build our operations here. And it's proven and served me well. I feel like we ended up investing in many companies during the time that now are some of the leaders that we think about when we think of top companies in New York.
And I don't want this to be just a chauvinistic, you got to be in New York kind of thing, but when you think of the future opportunities for tech generally, we can talk about what those are here too, because how relevant are they to our status as a global city, et cetera, but when you think as an investor of what the really big opportunities are going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, what are some of the categories you think about in general?
So we're focused on the future of work, which is broad, but we figure everyone spends so much time working, so why not make it better? And a big driver, and some of it's been talked about today, has been around machine intelligence. I mean, certainly I'm at Bloomberg, so you'd imagine data would come into my vernacular quite quickly, and it does. And I think there's a lot of potential that these capabilities are going to bring. And it's going to affect every aspect, almost every industry. Like Andrew Ng jokes around, like he and his friends play a game about which industries
He's an AI guy.
AI, he formerly at Baidu, and one of his comments was, they'd try and think about an industry not affected by AI or machine intelligence, and like hairdressing, that was like kind of the selections that they came up with. I mean, I think there's opportunities for it to augment and make a lot of the routine tasks that we do more seamless so that we can focus on, more creative or impactful work.
And you know what? Maybe I do want this to be a chauvinistic panel because I actually think there are reasons why I don't know if you were here, Jake, but when Jillian Tett was talking earlier, she was really,
Sorry for you.
It's okay.
she was really critical of Silicon Valley's mindset right now as being almost, she said it's directly comparable in her experience to Wall Street before the crash. The self-confidence, the over-self-confidence, the bubble mentality, that talking only to yourself, the belief that you can change the world without anybody's help, etc. Anyway, that's just a setup for you to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have investors on both coasts, and I certainly try to, we have a huge campus in San Francisco, and for those of you who don't know, GA really started as a education provider in New York to solve some of the skills gap in New York. We've now expanded around the world. And a lot of what we do now is helping companies, especially big companies, think about radically reskilling huge swaths of their employees for more tech-focused careers, help them find new channels of talent, new pipelines that will be more deliberately diverse and deliberate and intentional. But, probably the area of the world where we have the most or the least productive conversations is in San Francisco and Silicon Valley.
What about big companies and small companies working together?
No, about big companies thinking about what's going to happen to their employees. And they believe because they are in the center of all of this, it's all great. They are only job creators. They are, this is the center and the font of all innovation. They are the envy of the world. And so what is there to worry about? And I think, there is some strength to that sort of optimistic stance, I will say. In a lot of ways, we ask ourselves, why do they have the big companies? Why do they have the big tech monopolies, right? And I think the reason is because you have a capital system, you have sort of a culture that is kind of just shooting the moon 24/7 every day. And everybody's swinging for the fences all the time. And it leaves a lot of destruction in its wake, but when it wins big. And I think New York as a place, we tend to be a little more grounded. We tend to, we are a diverse, we see the world, we see reality, we see garbage on the street. We have an understand that we will all die someday. These are sort of this is how we occupy.
We're not drinking Soylent.
Correct. And so because of that, I think we tend to say, wow, these things go up, they go down. It's pretty important to have unit economics that make sense. Someday you got to get to profitability. We got to think about competition. And so all of those things, I think, tend to ground us. And so in one way, that's really good. I think most startups that start here tend to have been forged in a slightly hotter cauldron, right? And they tend to have a little more robust idea of how they're going to eventually be a self-sustaining business. On the flip side, we don't think quite as big. We don't say, I'm going to change the world, right? I mean, we've learned how to say that, I will say, because that's how you go get the West Coast money at the high valuations. But it's not the same. I think it's almost it's like, how big is the sky? You know what I mean? But that being said, I believe the fact that we have all of the big industries as the hub is here. Finance, media, fashion, we have business expertise that, talk about talent. We're not just a group of engineers and people who've learned how to play the startup casino, right? We are people who have had multiple functions in big companies and small companies and moved back and forth. And I will say the other thing we're seeing is that every company in the world is becoming a tech company. This is not just about the stack, right? This is not just about a few companies getting all the profits by selling that. I mean, every bank, every consumer-facing company, every industrial conglomerate is asking themselves, how are we going to use data and software and UX and whatever's next to create the next version of our business and the next version of our competitive advantage? And that's going to involve people, and it's going to involve real conversations, and I think New York is perfectly set up to do that.
Can I just
great,
add on to
yeah.
that? I'd make one point, too, that I think everyone knows that the market is due for some kind of correction, and I'm not stupid enough to predict what that will be. But
Which market are you referring to?
I think the startup casino, if you will.
Okay.
So startup valuations.
Startup valuations, VC money. I think that, we'll see some kind of correction eventually. And I think New York will weather that so much better because of the exact reasons Jake is talking about. There will be jobs, there will be things for people to do at established companies. They might not be able to wear jeans or bring their dog, or, but that's okay. There'll be places to land that will kind of keep the talent here and kind of keep our ecosystem here. I think that's going to be a lot harder it's always true. It's a lot harder in, kind of these one company towns, if you will.
Yeah.
One thing, though, that I just wanted to add, as somebody who has offices both in San
I'd
Francisco
like to hear
and in
that
New York, I actually see there's a lot of collaboration going on between both coasts. Like, we get asked all the time from our East Coast-based companies, can you find us money? And often the West Coast firms are starting to come to New York to look for financing. And similarly, a lot of our Bay Area founders want to find big customers, and this is the place to do it. I mean, that's one of the beauties and reasons why I love New York is you can just hop on a city bike or the subway, and you're literally close to people who can change your business.
I mean, look, our first corporate relationships that have sort of helped us try to imagine a new future for employees and employers to work together were GE, Amex, and JP Morgan.
Wow.
Right?
Hometown
Those are
companies.
good, yeah.
And they were all
Of course, G's in
20
Boston.
blocks away from us,
Yeah.
right? And we were able to have those conversations. And they don't mind when I wear jeans either. And I
I never wear anything else. So
Yeah.
I know, right? And they have to iron them.
I live
Who wants
here
to
and I
iron
don't
their
wear
pants?
anything else, so let them get used to it.
So
I learned that on the West
So
Coast. Too.
I do think that matters a lot. Now, I do think on the flip side, I mentioned this earlier, I do think we have some pretty big media powerhouses. And let's be clear, the tech companies that are doing the best, for the most part, in Silicon Valley are media companies. And they have taken some of the capital flows that we used to have on Madison Avenue to the West Coast, right? And I do think it gets into some very interesting conversations around monopolies and what does a monopoly look like in the 21st century, and what does market power look like, and how what is the behavior behaviors like cross subsidization and sort of I mean, you could argue giving away free stuff, which is what makes us love Google, is pretty anti-competitive.
Yeah.
And how many businesses aren't getting started because of that? But I think that's a conversation we all want to have because we want continued innovation and we don't want it to stop and we don't want it to just have a few big companies. And so these are the conversations that we should be having as a group. And I think New York is firmly on the side of we want aggressive competition, aggressive innovation. And I think that's a very powerful stance for us all to take.
I'll give you an interesting proof point of what you just said, and it's going to be demonstrated at 3:45 when we have John Martin, the CEO of Turner, on the stage. If anybody's ever heard him, which I know several, I think you have. This guy, wait till you hear what Turner is doing and how it thinks of itself. I mean, it is a tech company, and he's like an old media guy. He was CFO of Time Warner, and he is turning Turner, based here in Atlanta, into a tech company. That's a classic example
But
he knows if he doesn't do it, he's going to lose to Facebook and Google.
We hear that all the time
Yeah.
in every industry. And what's really cool is what we're seeing companies starting to do about it, right? Because the reality is, if you're an insurance company, you can't compete for the same talent. And yet you have all of these people who have actually grown up in industries working with numbers, working with data. So they're starting to ask themselves, how do we do something different about that? And I'm seeing them doing things that 4 years ago I wouldn't have thought they would be willing to do. They are spending millions of dollars, sometimes with us, which is really nice when they do, to retrain their employees to be data scientists, web developers. And there is, there is so much left to sort of do around that is part of this tech transformation that, is sort of very, I mean, look, I could have been on one of these other panels about sort of, job insecurity or what's going to happen in the world of work. Yeah. And I think one of the secrets is for everybody, we would love to talk about AI and machine learning, but it's still going to be about people for a very long time.
I mean, retraining is going to be super important.
And even like when AI, this idea that it's a black box you turn on and then everybody gets to go home is not how it's going to work. And so these companies that know how to run big organizations with people and add service and marshal technology at scale are still incredibly relevant. But what they have to do is figure out how to compete in this new world, which is slightly different. The rules of engagement are different. The fields where you are playing for competitive advantage have shifted. And that is why transforming your talent is going to be so important.
And the other thing to add is big companies are actually really well positioned because they have the data and the customer relationships. And so if they can get their workforce to be analyzing things in the right way, they really do have an advantage.
It's interesting, this universal basic income mindset is so fast growing and prevalent in the West Coast. You don't really hear it as much from New Yorkers. I mean, there are some who are, but I think it's partly because here it's easier to understand how people are going to still be necessary in some weird way.
We're just not techno-utopians. We don't have this fantasy of like, I mean, I was on some other panel and I said recently, I was like, if two Slack bots talk to each other, has work actually happened? And who is that for? And
on a less...
And they imagine, but that is the world, like, let's be very clear, like, there is a long-standing tradition in Silicon Valley of a techno-utopian philosophy that eventually everybody will just like ride around on their Segways and not have to do anything, and we're just gonna, and we'll have a couple servers talking to each other, and that's all the world's work will get done that way. And we know that's not actually what's going to happen.
Okay, but here's a negative about New York, that, and I do want to hear from you all momentarily, but Karen, you and Fred both on the stage today, there are not that many people like you here who are willing to write big checks and are based here and are focused on tech. And we clearly need more. Why is it that we don't have more of that here?
We're starting to see more. I'd love to see more, in particular, as you can imagine, being one of the 4% of the female partners at venture funds. I'd love to see
more of that too. Yeah.
More of that too.
Well, maybe that would help. I don't know. It probably would help in this way too. Get them in New York, women, VCs. Okay.
Exactly.
Let's get them.
And people of different, racial, economic backgrounds. It'd be great. And that's one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about. We actually do data analysis to predict who's likely to start a company. And it's, as you can imagine, gender, racial, economic, it's blind. It just does the analysis based on, people's history. And it predicts who's going to start a company, and we bring them together. And that's one of the other things I think that makes New York great is the community aspect of it. But to your point, or to your question about how do we get more capital here? Well, we need to keep having more wins here. I mean, what's been remarkable have been when founders have big exits, they start being angels. We've seen that happen with a number of the companies here, and we just need to keep
like Buddy Media, which you were deeply involved with.
Yeah, Mike Lazaro and his brother and Cass have been pretty active in the community. And we see that with Howard Lehrman and a bunch of other founders, Jonah, the Goodharts.
Who both have had big exits this year.
Yeah,
Howard and Jonah.
Nice.
We've had at least 3 big exits in New York this year, and they're not huge consumer-facing brands, so I don't think people realize. We've had Yext, Moat, and Trello have all had really nice exits. Mongo filed papers for an IPO this year. MongoDB. There are others in the rumor mill that we'll probably see soon, and I think you're going to continue to see that, which I think Karen's point, is incredibly well taken. That as you see more of that happening, and that's when the money comes back into.
And why that's. Well, sorry, you go.
One more thing I was going to say is it's not bad to have Massachusetts or Bay Area money come to New York either. I mean, I actually welcome the point of views of other geographies, and I think it gives us good input. We also need to have people continue to be at the level of scaling businesses. Like we have a lot of early stage seed companies and founders that can take something from 0 to maybe 15 million of revenue. I want to get more of the, and I think we have that through the deep industries, but we just need to get and convince them and see that they're eager to join growth oriented.
I will say, like, the core challenge that we've had, as we've scaled, is getting experienced startup executives with CFO experience or CMO experience is not easy around here. I mean, you have a bunch of ad tech CFOs who, and that's not necessarily a great track record there. Oh. And because just the dynamics of working with VCs are different. The mechanics of how you have to run a business when you're trying to grow that fast are different. So some of those scale challenges are at that level when you get to this 400 or 500 person teams. Like, is there the deep bench? The other thing I'll say is that, I think, look, the reason the early stage stuff is important is you need to have enough potential portfolio for somebody to be able to have a complete portfolio approach to VC. That's how you get the big money here, right? Because let's understand, there is not probably there's a few funds, but most funds, the way those partners make money, the way the LPs make money, the way people get rich in venture capital is by having one grand slam hit in their portfolio. That is how it works. And so to be assured of that, because that's what your career is being banked on, you want to have a portfolio of 20 of those in theory, right? And if you don't know if you're going to have 20 in a specific market, having a New York-based fund is a bit of a risk, right? Because if you only get to 10 and none of them are home runs, you've just flamed out. And so
yeah, but Fred did pretty well investing in Twitter based in San Francisco.
No, that is true. But the question is not, do we have a Fred, do we have a Bloomberg Beta? It's why don't we have 10 of those firms all competing with each other, driving valuations up for people?
I'd point out that when you have this conversation, two things. Number
Please,
one,
I don't need that anymore.
Exactly, right? You say you want more capital, but do you?
Do you? Since we've launched Tech NYC, this is something that comes up all the time in meetings all the time. And what we've found is that there's this kind of, and this is somewhat anecdotal, I don't have actual data behind this. There's this idea, and a lot of us agree, that a larger VC ecosystem would be good for the community. But then when you actually talk to entrepreneurs and investors, there's plenty of seed money. There's plenty of friends and family rounds here. And once a company can get that funding and then is big enough to go Series A, Series B, getting on a plane is really, that's okay. They want to do that anyway for some of the reasons Karen's talking about, to get other perspectives. Having all of your investors in one city can also create blinders.
One set of relationships, too.
So there's that. So we actually haven't found that there aren't that many people who come to me and say, we really need to ensure, that's bigger. And New York is the number 2 city, for VC dollars coming in. The second thing I'd point out, though I still kind of do believe that a larger VC ecosystem would be good for New York, despite that. And I'd point out that it feels so ridiculous to be sitting in New York City and talking about how we're trying to get more capital here. That's a crazy.
It's true.
That's a crazy premise.
Risk capital.
Risk, fine.
Yeah.
But
Series A and Series B.
Once you dig down, there are reasons, and there are reasons that we haven't done a better job in this city, deploying existing capital to the type of opportunities, some riskier than others, that we all are up here talking about. And I think there are some really interesting structural challenges, and I would say some incredibly interesting structural opportunities that New York uniquely presents as we think about unlocking that capital in effective and meaningful ways.
Okay. Please, Dawn, to get the mic and identify yourself. Dawn is at New York Tech Meetup, and she knows a lot about what's happening here.
That we have more, because we have more and better people and real people, that our tech companies are solving for more real problems with real people. And that rather than focusing on money and capital all the time, although I love Karen, you know.
I do think, I'm going to just take that. Let me say, I do think, and Jake and I have been talking about this earlier too before I came up here, I do think you have more focus on profitability, on building real and sustainable companies that aren't just like high growth, and I think that that's meaningful. I think that I also should say one other thing that's it's an answer to that, but that's also a more global point, which is I'm incredibly bullish on New York. I love New York. I chose to do this here.
Hard to tell.
I think New York is the best.
That's how you feel about New York.
But I will also say I fundamentally believe, I know you guys talked about this a little earlier with Fred too, that while entrepreneurship rates in the United States are actually down overall, we also know that net new job growth comes from new firms. So while most startups fail, the ones that succeed create new jobs. That needs to happen here, that needs to happen in the Valley, that needs to happen everywhere in between across this country too. And I am a firm believer in the type of kind of what we can do nationally at the federal level, but also kind of as a community to incent entrepreneurship, to incent the growth of technology, the growth of jobs in all parts of this country that need it. And so when you talk about real problems, I think you've got like a host of different types of problems, and that we need what the Valley does, and we need what New York does, and we need what Nashville does, and we need what Detroit does, and we need to support those ecosystems as well.
Well, it's amazing how there is a tech ecosystem in almost every country now. I mean, every city, I mean. Okay, let's get the mic here real fast. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, Kange Kanene from SAP. For the two women that work a lot with startups, right now in New York, what is the most interesting early stage startup that you know of, and what do they do?
Good question. Thank you for that.
Karen, I'll let you go first.
Oh, so many. I feel I'm going to be a little biased because I have such a huge portfolio. So I care a lot about education, and so one of them that I've been impressed with and we put money into is a company called PathGather, and it works with big companies and essentially makes their learning management systems work. And it's very easy to, add. And they have, the thing that's remarkable about them is usually when I think of corporate training, it's, I got to do that ethics, training or the workplace dynamics, and I'll do it once a year. They have over 30% of their users logging on monthly. So there's real, and it helps people get paths within companies to new skills and new jobs. Yep. So I'm excited about education. I got my start starting a business with my younger sister in the education area, and I'd love to see more of that.
Well, it's interesting too. GA started more as a co-working space, and sort of the education thing was kind of a pivot, right?
Well,
I mean, just quickly on that.
It was a very I would pivot, implies that we, had a long-term plan to begin with. And I think at the time, we started a space because we perceived a need for community around the startup ecosystem. This was 2010. It was all very nascent. And once we got going, what we saw was all of the startups were complaining about talent. And that was where we started. We had this room that we called a classroom. We started running classes. And that sort of spawned an entire global system here.
Right.
So education is sort of one of those key, I almost think of it as the picks and shovels piece of a lot of this tech stuff that we're talking about. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. And one interesting point is New York has some of the biggest education companies. We also have the biggest single school district in the country. These are huge assets, and there's been a lot of talk about how EdTech has built a little center here as well.
And the biggest concentration of corporate employees that need re-education. So what about your top startup in here?
I'll be quick. I think it's someone you'll hear from later today, but as long as I'm going to stick with the theme. Would you guys help me narrow my thinking? Andela, which is based here, you're going to hear from them. Yeah, they'll be here today, so I won't talk, but that to me is something that's really interesting too, because it's got this global perspective that New York really lends itself to a global perspective in a way that a lot of other cities don't. You guys can talk about that later.
Okay, we don't have time, but we're going to take one more from somebody who hasn't ever asked a question. Is there somebody? Yeah, over here.
With Venture for America. I have a follow-up question for Karen. So just curious if you could dive a little bit deeper into your experience as a woman in the venture capital space, and what do you think it will take to get more women in that industry?
Great, thank you.
Yes, so I think, look, no matter what, there's an element of serendipity and hard work to venture. There's also a key foundation of trust. That's what we try and build with all our founders. And so I think that people of different backgrounds actually have an advantage in some of that, because you come at it with a more open flexibility. One of the things I've been pretty active in trying to promote is to get LPs to be more actively involved in ensuring that their dollars are going toward supporting funds that are more inclusive. It just makes more economic sense. And the returns are there to prove that teams that are diverse perform better. So I'd love to see that happen in venture capital as well as, all business.
Yeah, it's proven. Diversity makes better decisions.
Yes.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
just, no.
I will say, as an entrepreneur, it's definitely a much better vibe when you go into an office that isn't all guys in khakis and blue shirts. Like, it's the worst feeling in the world, and
Yes,
that matters.
Interesting. Imagine if you were a woman, Zeke.
that's what I was about to say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was a really good and spirited, in a New York spirited conversation about our